You're listening to CSIR Engage, hosted by Kgauhelo Dioka.
Welcome to the second episode of our CSIR podcast series brought to you from the CSIR. Now, during our first podcast, we were interviewing Lara Godza, the project manager of the Biomanufacturing Industry Development Center right here at the CSIR, and she spoke to us about some of the opportunities that SMMEs can harness and how these SMMEs can also just tap into some of the benefits and offerings that the center has. Today, though, we are speaking to Miss Willemien van Niekerk, the project leader of an online climate risk profiling and adaptation tool called the Green Book. Now, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research recently launched a state-of-the-art online climate risk profiling and adaptation tool to assist municipalities across South Africa to assess climate risks and growth pressures by implementing adaptation actions towards the development of climate-resilient human settlements. Was that a nice introduction?
It was, thank you.
So tell us more about the Green Book, Willemien. What is it?
Thank you. It is actually not a book. It started out, we planned the Green Book to become a published manual for municipalities with guidelines on how to adapt their settlements to the impacts of climate change. But now it is an online, open access decision support tool for municipalities, mainly targeted at local municipalities, that provides information on the likely impact of climate change in the future, a 2050 future, as well as population growth projections. And then it also supports municipalities with an adaptation actions tool on what measures to integrate within their local planning functions so as to adapt settlements to climate change.
Why are you forecasting for the year 2050?
Because 2020 is just around the corner and it wouldn't make a lot of sense just to talk about 2020. But in planning, we often look at a short, a medium and a long-term future. Okay. In climate change, they also look at a short, medium and long-term future, but those terms differ quite a bit. So initially, we looked at a 2030 and a 2050 future for urban planning, for the planning and design of human settlements in South Africa. But 2030 is also not very, it's 10 years from now, almost. And, it's very hard to just, the trends will just say the same for a 2030 future. So we took a long-term view on urban planning and on our settlements in South Africa, and that is a 2050 future. For climate change, that is a medium-term future. For them, a long-term future is 2100.
Okay.
So we've also done the climate change projections, downscaled them for a 2050 and a 2100 future. But a 2100 future, that becomes impossible to say what cities would look like by 2100. So we took a medium view on medium-term view on the planning of settlements, and that is why we looked at a 2050 future. It also gives municipalities ample time to adapt their cities for the likely future that we will see in 2050. It gives them 30 years to plan for those likely impacts that we will see. And it is also the period over which climate change, over which we will see the climatic changes, because climatic changes isn't weather. It doesn't happen tomorrow or next week or next season, but it is something that happens, that gradually happens over time. And another reason is that a lot of infrastructure hasn't been built yet. And infrastructure also has a long lifespan. So we need to think about that long lifespan of infrastructure as well and plan for it now. So if we can plan already for it now and we can budget for it by the time that likely future is happening, we would have adapted our cities and our settlements well to those impacts of climate change.
Why do you think that something like this wasn't developed about 15 years ago so that we can benefit from it now? Because I'm just listening to you now and I'm just thinking the people who are going to benefit from this online tool are my kids. We won't. Well, maybe we will, but at least not now.
No, you're right, and I think that's a good question. So we also dedicated this book to the children who was born during the 3 years that we developed the Green Book. Yeah. 2 of those are mine. And I think the reason why why we haven't developed something sooner is because of the development of technology and science, and also the availability of data and information. So 15 years ago, it wasn't possible to downscale climate change projections to the scale, to the very fine resolution that we've scaled it down to in the Green Book. So for the first time in South Africa, we've scaled it down to 8 by 8 square kilometer grids. And in the past, that has only been done at a 50 by 50 square kilometer grid. So you can see it's very finer, the resolution is much finer. But it was the first time that was done in South Africa, apart from the metropolitan cities. So one, the data didn't exist, the technology to do this didn't exist, because we used the supercomputers in Cape Town to do the computing.
From the Center for High Performance Computing, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, once we have access to those supercomputers, we were able to do those calculations, which is millions and millions of calculations.
And will this system also be then updated in real time? Because I'd like to believe that a lot of things change. I'm sure a lot will change in the 30 years. So is it updated in real time?
At the moment, we are busy in discussions with the Department of Environmental Affairs and with the National Disaster Management Centre, who was also our partner on this project, as well as Santam from the insurance industry, to secure funding to update the Green Book. But you know how the CSIR works. We have to have the money to make updates to the Green Book. But I am sure that we will secure those funding. Also, there are many people interested in funding the Green Book, also from the international community. So we certainly, in the plans, are certainly an update to the Green Book in the next couple of years. I think the next phase for us is just to make people aware of the Green Book, to roll it out to local municipalities, to capacitate and do training on the Green Book, so that we can ground truth some of the information that is found in the Green Book.
Okay. So, Willemien, you spoke about funding and the fact that, there are some international funders who are already in funding this online tool. So how do you go about securing that funding? What is your approach?
So we don't have any funders at the moment, international funders, but the project was funded. So the starting, the seed funding for this project was from the Canadians, so the International Research and Development Centre in Canada. So they provided half of the funding, and the CSIR long-term thematic program, the other half of the funding that was required for this 3-year program. But there are lots of funding for cities and climate change adaptation worldwide. We just have to be good to source those funders and then to secure a contract or a proposal with them. So how we went about it is we reacted to a call for proposals by the IDRC, and we put in a proposal which was then shortlisted, and then we were approved for funding by the IDRC. But I think it is mostly looking out for those calls for proposals for funding and responding to it and being very clear on what your proposal is all about and what it's not. So speak to your strengths, I would say.
So let's talk about municipalities now, because after all, you did develop this tool for them, right? So I'm assuming that you what informed the creation or the development of this tool was, because things are changing now. There's a whole global warming phenomenon that municipalities, they have to kind of keep up with, right? But what is their response to this tool?
So far, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. So the municipalities who have already seen the tool, they would respond by saying, "Oh, but you've done our work for us." And which is not exactly true. They still have to contextualize the information that we are providing and in the risk and vulnerability.
And actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what they mean with we've done the work for them, all municipalities are supposed to do a risk and vulnerability assessment of their local municipal area. And I think many municipalities do not have the capacity or the expertise to do that. And what we have done now is to do it for the whole country, for not only for local municipalities, but for all settlements in South Africa, which tallies up to over 1,700 settlements in South Africa. And this information is freely available on the risk profile tool on the Green Book. So in that way, we are also supporting the mandate by the National Disaster Management Centre, who assists municipalities in conducting their risk and vulnerability assessments in their areas of jurisdiction.
Yeah. So which municipalities have currently uptaken this? Are all municipalities in South Africa currently using the tool?
So the tool has only been launched on the 8th of March, so earlier this month.
Yes.
And before that, it wasn't finished. So we have, I think, distributed and presented on some of the initial findings mostly to national government, whose mandate it is to inform local government. And so they were all excited about the Green Book and the information and support it offers. But since we've done the launch, a few municipalities have already contacted us to say that they've come across this Green Book and they find the information extremely valuable. But we haven't officially rolled out the Green Book to municipalities. That is the next phase, and that is where the funding from the Department of Environmental Affairs and the National Disaster Management Centre and Santam will come in to fund the rollout and training to municipalities.
Okay, and then now with all the considering that there's so many municipalities in South Africa, right? Would you say that there are more? Or there are some municipalities who are more susceptible to climate risk, and therefore you would want those municipalities to sort of uptake this tool faster than other municipalities?
I think what is great about the Green Book, it provides a national picture of all those municipalities that are at risk of various climate-related hazards. So we specifically looked at inland flooding, at coastal flooding, at drought and wildfire. And what the additional exposure would be of settlements to these hazards given climatic changes in the future, or likely climatic changes in the future. And so we have this national picture of these various hazards together with a cumulative picture of how they overlay. And from this map, we can see what are the priority areas. And I think also important to remember that not all places will have the same kind of population pressure. So we've also done population projections to see which places in South Africa will grow in future, which places will stabilize in terms of its growth, and which would even decline. And so that combined picture of population pressure together with the climate-related hazards provides us with an idea of where those priority areas are. And so that helps national government to prioritize investment and disaster risk reduction and facilitate disaster risk reduction in those places. And it gives us an idea which municipalities are really at great risk in the future.
All right, then. Thank you so much for that. We'll continue our conversation with Ms. Willemien van Niekerk on the Green Book when we come back after the break.
You're listening to CSIR Engaged. The Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, is a leading scientific and technology research organization that researches, develops, localizes, and diffuses technologies to accelerate socioeconomic prosperity in South Africa. The organization's work contributes to industrial development and supports a capable state. The CSIR was established through an Act of Parliament in 1945, and the organization's executive authority is the Minister of Science and Technology. Welcome back. You're listening to CSIR Engaged.
So welcome back to our CSIR Engage podcast series brought to you from the CSIR. So before the break, we were speaking to Willemien van Niekerk, who was just giving us a brief introduction about this online tool called the Green Book. So Willemien, let's just delve in deeper to the actualities of the Green Book. How does it work, and what do you hope that the tool achieves?
Let me start with the second question. We hope that it will support government, local government specifically, in achieving climate resilient cities where the infrastructure is climate proof, where the people and places are safe from the impact of climatic changes and the various climate related hazards. and that they would have achieved this by integrating the adaptation actions that we propose in the Green Book into their planning and design plans and strategies and policies, such as the Spatial Development Plan, the Land Use Management Plan, Urban Design and Landscaping Plans, as well as the engineering services and infrastructure provision. How does the Green Book work? As I said before, it is a open access online tool, so anyone, all the information available is free, and it's available to anyone. And what one does is one goes to the risk profile tool, and you can enter your local municipality's name. And once you have done that, it opens up a wealth of information on your risk and vulnerability profile. So first of all, it talks to your vulnerability profile. Under the vulnerability profile, there is economic, social, physical, and environmental vulnerability indicators. And it also indicates over time whether your vulnerability has worsened or improved. And so municipalities can also compare themselves to other local municipalities within the province or even within the country.
Okay.
And they can use that information to work it into their climate change adaptation plans and their disaster risk management plans on their risk and vulnerability assessments. Then the next step is to go to the climate change information. So municipalities can click on various maps to see what will temperature and rainfall do in future, and whether the temperature will increase. So for South Africa, the temperatures will increase,
yes,
in some cases even severely so. And then rainfall is a different story, and the uncertainty about rainfall is also a bit higher. But then municipalities can see what will rainfall do in the future. We provide the current as well as the 2050 future, so they can see what it looks like now and what is a likely future for 2050. And then the next step would be to look at flooding, coastal flooding, drought, and wildfire, and to see how will settlements' exposure to these various climate-related hazards increase or decline, though there are not many settlements for which those hazards will decline in future, given the temperature and rainfall projections for the future. But you can have a look to see who in your population, or what parts of your settlements and population will be exposed in future to these hazards. Then the next step would be to look at resources. So we also look at water, surface water, groundwater, water supply, and then also the macroeconomy and specifically agriculture.
Okay.
And we can see what it is like now. And then in the 2050 future, what will be the impact of climate change on these key resources. For, as you know, water is such an important aspect and is at great risk in South Africa, which is a water-scarce country. And then the last step would be, given your risk profile. So say, for example, you're a settlement on the coast, and you are threatened by coastal flooding as well as drought. Can you believe it? Both of those. You can look up what are those adaptation actions that are proposed for municipalities that are exposed to drought and coastal flooding. And then the adaptation actions tool offers you a basket of adaptation actions, and you can select those ones that are applicable to the local conditions and also to the capacity of that local municipality.
So one can also actually use this tool to mitigate some problems that came as a result of climate change.
Absolutely. So I think that is the essence of the tool is, so yes, you get your risk and vulnerability assessment, but then we also propose solutions, actions.
Worst case scenario.
Actions that you can take to integrate in your planning so as to mitigate the impacts of climate change and adapting your settlements to the future climatic impact.
I heard you saying something about the agricultural industry. So outside, other than municipalities, who else can use this system then?
So our target audience was municipalities, but I think it is obviously of useful to many other organizations and the industry itself. You're right. So the agricultural industry could make use of the tool by looking what will be the impact of climate change on all the agricultural commodities across the whole country. So we show for every local municipality their top 3 commodities and how they are performing currently. And then what are the expected performance of those commodities in 2050 given the impact of climate change? For example, we will say that, given climate change, these commodities will probably not have such high potential in this area given increases in temperature.
What kinds of commodities would those be?
So that would be like livestock production, it would be maize production, all of your fisheries, forestry and agricultural production. And then, other industries as well. The insurance industry is already on board to partner with us in rolling out and capacitating the municipalities most at risk in the country to adapt their settlements to future impacts of climate change. So the insurance industry is on board, and you can imagine the value for them to know which areas are at risk, so what kind of infrastructure is at risk, and how settlements can mitigate for that in future. And then, I think other banks and other industries as well to protect the investments and their assets in various local municipalities. It would be of great interest to them to see the future risks.
So, South Africa is heading, and rapidly so, into the fourth industrial revolution. So how would this tool then speak to this advent?
So I think the Green Book helps to provide that environment conducive to the fourth industrial revolution. If you imagine that the fourth industrial revolution, the backbone of it is mobility and energy and communication networks, then they are also susceptible to the impacts of climate change in the future because they are still geographically located, some of that infrastructure. And if we know what the exposure of that infrastructure or networks will be, we are able to protect them in the future, and that will benefit the fourth industrial revolution, the industries and the networks and the connectivity of the fourth industrial revolution. So I think it helps to create an environment conducive to industries and networks and connectivity to thrive in the coming eras.
Yeah. Okay. And then what is the most important thing you would like local government and the other industries now that you just mentioned, what is the most important thing that you would like them to know about this tool?
I think given the evidence, the scientific evidence and the qualitative adaptation actions that we provide, I think one thing that is very clear to us is the urgency for local municipalities and other organizations to adapt to the likely future of climate change. And I think once we've really understood the possible impacts of climate change, we would really feel that urgency to adapt, but also to mitigate future impacts by climate change by reducing our greenhouse gases. And I think the other thing is that, so one, the urgency, and two, that a lot of things that we can do to adapt our settlements to the future impacts of climate change is simple, and it is basically good planning and design practice and managing our cities well. So it includes maintenance of infrastructure and services. And by doing that, we protect the really vulnerable parts of our communities and our places, our settlements, to the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that stands out for me really is the fact that this will contribute significantly to service delivery. I think, because now we're looking at 2050. So I hope that, I think even before 2050, municipalities can sort of just take a look at this platform and find ways of really improving service delivery in the country, right? So I know that the Green Book is structured into 3 components. Firstly, why? Couldn't they all be integrated? And just for the benefit of our listeners, just tell us what these 3 components are.
Okay, I already briefly spoke about the 3 components. The first one I didn't mention, which is story maps.
Yes.
So under the story maps, we provide a national picture of, for example, climate change, population growth projections, the impact on agriculture, the impact of flooding and drought and wildfires on our settlements. So those story maps take you through a story with maps, and it narrates a story about what will be the impacts of these on South Africa and its settlements. And then the second component is the risk profile tool, and the third component is the adaptation actions tool. Sorry, what was your first part of your question again?
that couldn't they all be integrated? Yes.
I think I think what is important is that there were over 50 researchers contributing to the Green Book. And it's very interdisciplinary, and the scientific results also came in numerous formats. Some did modeling, some did projections, others are scenario-based, others is qualitative. So though a lot of that is already integrated in the risk profile tool, the various tools have different purposes. So the risk profile tool integrates all of that information, all of the scientific information into one tool. And then the story maps provide you with the national picture, because the risk profile is a local picture where you look up your local municipality. And then the last one, the adaptation actions tool, is providing the solutions that you can integrate into your local plans.
All need three of them.
We
to
do.
all need to all be separate. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Willemien.
Thank you very much.
So that's a wrap from this episode of CSIR Engage, where we were joined by Willemien van Niekerk talking to us about an online climate risk profiling and adaptation tool called the Green Book.
You're listening to CSIR Engaged.
So this is how we wrap up another episode of CSIR Engage, where we had the pleasure of interviewing Willemien van Niekerk, who is the project leader of the Green Book. For more information on the Green Book, you can just log on to greenbook.co.za, and to get in touch with the CSIR, we are on social media, on Twitter at CSIR, Facebook, CSIR South Africa, Instagram, CSIR South Africa, on LinkedIn as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and we are on YouTube on CSIR New Media. That's it from me. Thank you for tuning in.
You're listening to CSIR Engaged.